Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Dragon Prince Yuan Season 2 episode number 20 based on novel. So let's start. Patriarch Kang Xian nodded. As for the locations of the third and fourth saint runes, you will naturally find out when you obtain the second saint rune. Evidently, he was leaving out some information as insurance, such that if Zhu Yuan was somehow caught by some kind of technique or ploy, he would not be able to divulge all of the saint rune locations at once. Yao Yao rose from the white jade table. Patriarch Kang Xian looked at her, before his gaze turned towards Zhu Yuan as his expression gradually turned serious. Lastly, I hope that you will be able to properly protect her. Since even Kang Yuan believes in you, I too believe that you can do it. Zhu Yuan solemnly nodded. He could sense that Yao Yao's identity had great implications, or legendary figures, such as Patriarch Kang Xian and Master Kang Yuan, would not place such heavy emphasis upon it. After Patriarch Kang Xian was done, he waved his head and said, "Go." Respect rose in Zhu Yuan's heart, as he gazed at Patriarch Kang Xian's illusory figure. Zhu Yuan was still too weak and small now, so he could not understand what exactly Patriarch Kang Xian and the rest were doing. However, his actions of protecting Yao Yao even at the price of his own life was something Zhu Yuan respected and admired. Zhu Yuan bowed to Patriarch Kang Xian, before turning around with Yao Yao, soon disappearing into the mists. Patriarch Kang Xian watched them leave as he sighed meaningfully and mumbled to himself. Whether or not the human race will survive the foretold sacred disaster will depend on them. When Zhu Yuan and Yao Yao walked out of the mists, they felt the entire world around them begin to tremble. The two lifted their heads, finding that the sky above the Saint Remains domain was slowly splitting open. Through the crack, a familiar land appeared. It was the area outside the Saint Remains domain. Evidently, the path out was being opened. While the Saint Remains domain was being opened, countless streaks of light dashed into the sky, like locusts as they flew towards the crack, making it a rather busy sight. While Zhu Yuan was cultivating during the past half a month, Patriarch Kang Xian had closed the Saint Remains domain. All of the numerous geniuses within were unable to exit, and could only silently wait here. Fortunately, the Genesis Chi in the Saint Remains domain was strong and plentiful, so it felt pretty good to cultivate in here for a while. Now that Zhu Yuan was done, the Saint Remains domain was once again opened by Patriarch Kang Xian. A surge of Genesis Chi light whizzed over, making a beeline for Yao Yao. Yao Yao stretched out her arms and caught it as the light faded, revealing Tuntun's figure. Yao Yao gently stroked Tuntun's head while it narrowed its eyes and enjoyed the caress, releasing happy noises from its mouth. Zhu Yuan's gaze looked down, feeling somewhat sentimental as he gazed upon the vast, endless Saint Remains domain. Before entering, he was practically a nobody in the Kangman continent. However, when he left, it was likely that his name had already shaken the entire Kangman continent. This was not arrogance on his part. The splendid achievements he had racked up along the way were already enough to make him number one amongst the younger generation of the Kangman continent. Moreover, after receiving the Saint Blood's benefits, he was much stronger compared to half a month ago. If Zhu Yuan were to encounter Wu Huang again now, the battle would be a little one-sided. "Let's go," said Zhu Yuan to Yao Yao before Genesis Chi began to spread, forming a cloud of dark gold beneath their feet. Genesis Chi soared into the sky, carrying the two towards the crack. The instant they charged through the crack, the entire world seemed to become wider and bigger. On the land in the distance, a majestic city was barely visible. It was Saint Remains City. At this current time, the area outside of the Saint Remains domain was extremely lively and bustling, a seemingly unending stream of geniuses flying out. Zhu Yuan and Yao Yao's appearance instantly drew countless gazes, every one of them filled with respect. The shocking scene of Zhu Yuan defeating Wu Huang was still deeply carved into everyone's minds. "Hey, you're pretty good, Zhu Yuan, to think that even Wu Huang was beaten by you." Two rays of Genesis Chi light flew over and approached Zhu Yuan and Yao Yao as a lovely laughter was heard. It was Luluo and Zhuqiu Qingyu. Luluo's large eyes blinked as she stared at Zhu Yuan, amazement and astonishment filling her small face. "How about you?" asked Zhu Yuan with a chuckle. On the Saint Stars, Luluo had met Zhu Ying again. Luluo answered in a smug manner, "Humph, how can she be my match? I was merely caught off guard the previous time." By the side, Zhuo Qiuqingyu's pretty eyes swirled as she stared at Zhu Yuan with interest and grinned. How does it feel? You're now the number one person amongst the Kangman continent's younger generation. Yao Yao carried Tunton, her red lips curling slightly as she shot Zhuo Qiuqingyu a look. Then are you still interested in my earlier proposal? Zhuo Qiuqingyu stared at Yao Yao's perfect, unblemished and fair face, unable to resist slipping over and hooking a hand around Yao Yao's slender waist as she said in a low voice, I am indeed a little interested now, but you're still the one I'm most interested in. How about the three of us tie the knot? Two young ladies, one perfectly beautiful, but rather cold and aloof, the other enchantingly bewitching. When their faces were put side by side, it caused several geniuses to cast somewhat lustful gazes over. Get lost. Yao Yao was expressionless, as she reached out and flicked Zhuo Qiuqingyu's forehead, pushing her away. The words of this little temptress was really too brazen. Zhu Yuan was pretty close to them, and was hence able to hear Zhuo Qiuqingyu's words. His entire body seemed to instantly heat up, his gaze involuntarily sweeping across the two young ladies' faces. Yao Yao seemed to sense his gaze, her eyes narrowing slightly as she looked towards him. Zhu Yuan felt a chill and hurriedly withdrew his eyes, not daring to meet her gaze. After the many geniuses left the Saint Remains domain, a soft cough suddenly rang out across the area, somehow covering every other noise. The entire place fell silent. Every genius watched as 6 Genesis Chi clouds drifted over from far away. 6 figures were seated on each cloud, powerful Genesis Chi pressure rippling from their bodies. It was the 6 envoys. Upon their arrival, the crowd of geniuses grew nervous. They knew that the end of the Saint Remains domain was the start of the selection by the 6 envoys. Those that they found worthy would be allowed to enter the 6 sects to train. These were the strongest sects in Sangshuan heaven. For every genius present, it was akin to a carp leaping through the dragon's gate. 6 clouds of Genesis Chi hovered in the air. 6 figures were seated on each one, powerful and vigorous Genesis Chi spreading from their bodies that intimidated and awed everyone in the area. In the face of these 6 divine-dwelling experts, the numerous geniuses were all extremely respectful, not daring to show a slightest hint of arrogance, as they patiently waited. Because they knew that these 6 practically had complete control over the futures of every genius here. The 6 sacred sects were the strongest sects in Sangshuan heaven. As long as one could enter and train inside, one's future would be incomparable to staying behind in a continent like theirs. After all, the best resources and experts of Sangshuan heaven were gathered in these 6 sects. Hence, many people felt that even entering these 6 sects as an ordinary disciple would be better than being a genius in the Kangman continent. Zhu Yuan's gaze also looked towards the 6 envoys. He had already gained information about the 6 sacred sects in the Saint Remains domain, and now knew that the barefooted uncle was an envoy of the Sangshuan sect. As for the fair, clean-shaven Zhao Pan that looked like a dishonorable middle-aged man, he was the envoy of Sacred Palace. The other 4 sects were the North Sea Dragons Subduing Hall, Sword Seeker Sect, Heavenly Ghost Sect and the 100 Flowers Fairy Palace. These 4 great sects were also very famous in Sangshuan heaven, and were said to be behemoth-like existences. On one of the clouds, the Sacred Palace envoy, Zhao Pan, swept his cold gaze across the crowd. His gaze was akin to the edge of a blade, no one daring to meet it. Although you are the geniuses of the Kangman continent, it will not be so easy to enter our 6 sacred sects. You should know that there are millions of continents in Sangshuan heaven, and the Kangman continent really doesn't stick out amongst them. The other continents also have all kinds of geniuses of uncountable numbers. Envoys from the 6 sacred sects have also been sent to these places to select disciples. Therefore, do not feel so pleased with yourselves, just because you performed somewhat decently in the Saint Remains domain. If but amongst the entire younger generation of Sangshuan heaven, none of you are anything special. Zhao Pan's indifferent voice was akin to a basin of cold water, giving a cold awakening to numerous geniuses that had originally been under the impression that they had performed pretty well in the Saint Remains domain. Zhu Yuan also frowned slightly. He could feel that Zhao Pan's frosty gaze seemed to pause on Zhu Yuan when he spoke, as if these words were directed at the former. However, Zhu Yuan's expression did not change, neither showing joy nor anger. Luluo mumbled in a low voice, "How loathsome." Zhuo Qiuqingyu glanced at Zhu Yuan and quietly said, "I managed to gather some information earlier. The one who saved Zhu Yuan's spirit was the Sacred Palace envoy, Zhao Pan." Zhu Yuan's eyes widened a little as anger flitted across the depths of his eyes. So this fellow was the one who had ruined things. If not for that, Zhu Yuan would have been able to kill Wu Huang's spirit in the Saint Remains domain, bringing a clean end to the matter, unlike the current situation, where there were loose ends. Envoy Zhao Pan need not be so stern. I feel that there are some pretty good seedlings among these little ones. If we provide guidance and training for them, they may even become pillars that support the sect in the future. While the numerous geniuses in the area were completely silent, a laugh suddenly rang out. If one turned to look, one would discover that the one who had spoken was the currently smiling envoy of the Zhangshuan sect, Mu Wuji. Alright, let's not waste any more time. Begin the selection process. The one who spoke this time was a man in white robes. His face was cold and stern, the Genesis chi around him extremely sharp, while a sword lay across his lap. He was the envoy of the Sword Seeker sect. Those who managed to reach the Saint's stairs may take a step forward. A woman's kind and gentle voice sounded. She wore palace robes on which an exquisite pattern of 100 flowers could be seen. She was clearly the envoy from the 100 Flowers Fairy sect. At the sound of her voice, a few dozen figures walked out from the crowd of geniuses. They were the group who had managed to reach the Saint's stairs, and included Zhu Yuan, Yao Yao, Luluo and the rest. What caused Zhu Yuan to be somewhat surprised, however, was that Yiming was also present, though the other few were nowhere to be seen. The 6 envoys suddenly moved as they gazed upon these 3 dozen or so geniuses. Genesis chi swept forth, transforming into giant hands that barbarically grabbed several individuals, and threw them onto the Genesis chi clouds behind the envoys, not caring whether these geniuses were willing or not. Soon, only a handful of figures were left. They were Zhu Yuan, Yao Yao, Luluo and the other more outstanding geniuses. My Sword Seeker sect lives for the sword. Are you willing to join us? The Sword Seeker sect envoy first looked towards Li Chunjun, his voice much gentler, clearly pretty fond of the latter's talent in the sword. Li Chunjun gave a slight nod. I am willing. His original goal was the Sword Seeker sect after all. The other geniuses understood upon seeing this. The final few were the envoy's focus, hence why they would even voluntarily ask for these individuals' opinion. Unlike the previous geniuses that had been casually divided amongst the envoys without caring about what they thought. Even so, numerous geniuses were still overflowing with envy. After all, they did not even have the qualifications to be casually divided by the envoys. The spooky-looking man in black robes looked towards Junshu and said, the Kingyama sect you previously cultivated was founded by someone who was once an envoy of the Heavenly Ghost sect. Are you willing to enter the Heavenly Ghost sect? Junshu respectfully nodded. These 2 little lasses are not bad. Why not both of you join the 100 Flowers Fairy Palace? The beautiful woman smiled as she looked towards Luluo and Zhuqiu Qingyu. Luluo and Zhuqiu Qingyu exchanged a look. After seeing that none of the other envoys were going to say anything, they gracefully bowed to the beautiful woman. The beautiful woman smiled faintly, before she cast her gaze towards Zhu Yuan's side at Yao Yao and said, I really like this little girl too. Although Yao Yao barely had any Genesis chi, the beautiful woman could see that the former's spirit was extremely powerful. If she were to focus solely on spirit cultivation, her future accomplishments may be pretty amazing too. Mu Wuji coughed and said, Envoy Shongyu, I believe 2 is enough. The other envoys nodded. The main reason why they had allowed the 100 Flower Fairy Palace to take 2 was because they could not be bothered to compete with the women. After all, the 100 Flower Fairy Palace was rather unique, only accepting female disciples. Upon seeing the other envoys' objections, the beautiful woman Shongyu could only regretfully shake her head. The next one was Ning Zhon, who entered the North Sea Dragon's subduing hall. At this moment, the Sacred Palace envoy, Zhao Pan, suddenly looked towards Yiming and said in an indifferent voice, Yiming, you should enter my sacred palace. The numerous geniuses in the area began to stir, everyone feeling rather discontent. After all, Yiming was from the Dongxian continent, and it already felt against rules for them to come here to participate in the Kangman continent. They never expected that he would still gain the attention of the Sacred Palace envoy. However, Zhao Pan did not even give them a single glance, merely looking at Yiming. Yiming hesitated slightly, but ultimately nodded his head. Sacred Palace was on the rapid rise in Sangshuan heaven, and entering it to train was definitely an excellent choice. Mu Wuji breathed out smoke, smiling as he glanced at Zhu Yuan, before speaking towards Yao Yao beside him, Are you willing to enter my Sangshuan sect? Yao Yao nonchalantly nodded. As such, only Zhu Yuan was left. Every gaze in the area looked over. Everyone knew that Zhu Yuan was the most outstanding in this bat's Saint Remains domain. Sure enough, Mu Wuji smiled and said, Zhu Yuan, as the only one to reach the peak of Saint Mountain in this bat's Saint Remains domain, you may choose to join any sect you wish. The world around fell silent, waiting for Zhu Yuan's answer. But just as Zhu Yuan was about to speak, the Sacred Palace envoy, Zhao Pan, suddenly intercepted, Zhu Yuan, if you enter my Sacred Palace, we will let you off for killing Wu Huang's physical body. Moreover, you should know that my Sacred Palace is currently the strongest sect in Sangshuan Heaven. Once you enter, you will naturally receive guidance and tutelage. Zhao Pan looked down from above at Zhu Yuan, his tone appearing rather proud. From what he could see, he had already given Zhu Yuan enough face, and even offered the latter an olive branch. If Zhu Yuan had any brains, he should know what to choose. The truth was that Zhao Pan had spoken these words not because he thought highly of Zhu Yuan. After all, it was only a selection from geniuses of a tiny Kangmang continent. The reason why he had given this offer was because he knew that Zhu Yuan was very important to Mu Wuji. The former just had to stir up a little trouble to make things difficult for Mu Wuji. Sure enough, Mu Wuji's expression immediately turned rather ugly as he glared at Zhao Pan. Let him off. It's his fault for not being good enough and getting his physical body killed. Just who do you intend to not let off? Mu Wuji sneered. Zhao Pan ignored him, merely continuing to look down at Zhu Yuan. Gaze after gaze all turned towards Zhu Yuan. Under the watching eyes of the crowd, Zhu Yuan chuckled and lifted his head to look at Zhao Pan. I appreciate Envoy's thoughtfulness, but Sacred Palace's requirements are too high, and I'm afraid that I won't be able to reach them. After finishing, he looked towards Mu Wuji and said, I wish to join that Sangshuan sect. His voice echoed across the area. Zhao Pan's expression instantly turned dark and cold, fury appearing in his eyes. A split second later, he suddenly took a step forward as Berserk Genesis Chi pressure swept towards Zhu Yuan. Unappreciative thing. Since that is so, let's have a chat about the matter of killing Wu Huang's physical body. His chilling voice rang out across the area. Boundless and vigorous Genesis Chi ferociously swept out from Zhao Pan's body like a thunderstorm, causing the world around him to tremble slightly. The expressions of the countless geniuses present involuntarily changed. The anger of a divine-dwelling expert was not something the likes of them could withstand. The Genesis Chi pressure charged towards Zhu Yuan, making him feel the brunt of it. In that moment, he felt as if his body was deep in the sea, terrifying pressure rushing towards him from all directions, as if intending to crush him to a pulp. The bones all over his body creaked and cracked. In his chi dwelling, the Omnipython chi let out a hiss in response as it swiftly broke out of his body, transforming into a giant Genesis Chi python around him to block the frightening pressure. Zhao Pan, what do you think you're doing? However, Zhu Yuan did not suffer for long before Mu Wuji's angry voice was suddenly heard. Rumble. Equally powerful and vast Genesis Chi erupted from Mu Wuji's body, meeting Zhao Pan's Genesis Chi pressure head-on. The standoff between two divine-dwelling experts immediately made the Genesis Chi in the area show faint signs of boiling. Zhao Pan icily said, Humph, this vicious and merciless kid slayed the physical body of a genius my Sacred Palace had our attention on. If he is not punished, won't others look down on my Sacred Palace? Mu Wuji, I advise you to hand over the kid. Or else when I report this to the Palace Master, my Sacred Palace may step up to formally demand your Sangshuan sect to hand him over. Sangshuan sect's power had been on the decline ever since the death of Patriarch Kang Xian, while Sacred Palace was akin to a rising sun, even showing signs of soon becoming the #1 sect in Sangshuan Heaven. This was why they had grown increasingly overbearing over the years. Mu Wuji laughed in extreme anger when he heard this. Zhao Pan, who the heck do you think you are? Do you really believe my Sangshuan sect is afraid of your Sacred Palace? Such a fate befell Wu Huang, because his skills were lacking. Aren't you afraid of becoming a laughingstock if you continue to pester us here? The other 4 envoys frowned slightly, evidently also thinking that Zhao Pan was causing trouble for no reason. Zhao Pan's eyes hardened. It seems that you're not going to hand him over. If so, I'll have to take him myself. Rumble. Magnificent Genesis Chi whizzed out, transforming into a giant 100 feet wide hand that grabbed at Zhu Yuan. Mu Wuji coldly snorted as green Genesis Chi rapidly blew out from his nose. Like a giant Genesis Chi chain, it wrapped around the Genesis Chi hand, binding it and preventing it from descending. Green smoke dragon bind technique. At the same time, the pipe in Mu Wuji's hand shook as green smoke rose from it. A split second later, the smoke seemed to penetrate space, directly appearing in the air around Zhao Pan as it began to coil around his body. The green smoke may appear thin and weak, but the surrounding space began to warp and distort when held in its clutches, as if even a giant dragon would be unable to escape its grasp. However, the moment the green smoke wrapped around Zhao Pan, his body suddenly began to distort. In the end, his body transformed into a shadow with a poof and slowly faded away. The moment his figure faded, Zhao Pan's icy snort rang out. Humph, I've long heard of Mu Wuji's dragon bind technique. How can I possibly not be prepared? Shadow split technique. The eyes of the other 4 envoys widened slightly when they saw this. It was a rather high-level Genesis technique of Sacred Palace. They had not expected Zhao Pan to have mastered it. In the sky, the giant Genesis Chi hand Zhao Pan had sent forth earlier suddenly split open, revealing his true body, as his icy gaze locked onto the nearby Zhu Yuan. Let's see who can save you today. Zhao Pan transformed into a blur as he shot forward. The sight of this caused Zhu Yuan's expression to change slightly as a cold look filled his eyes. He never imagined that Zhao Pan would be so shameless as to use the might of a divine dwelling expert to deal with a younger generation like himself, who had only recently touched the Alpha Origin stage. Space Lock Palm. Boundless Genesis Chi gathered towards Zhao Pan's outstretched hand, before he suddenly swatted downwards. The palm seemed to abruptly enlarged in Zhu Yuan's eyes, covering the entire sky as if blocking off any escape. Beside him, Yaoiro's pretty face had turned exceedingly frosty as her chest rose slightly, an indication that she had truly been angered. A faint glow began to emerge between her brows. However, it was at this moment that Zhu Yuan suddenly grabbed Yaoiro's cool as jade hand. He looked towards her ice-cold eyes and faintly shook his head, before reaching out to grab her slender waist as their figures rapidly backed away. At the same time, the Saint Rune began to spin in his eyes. Humph, the space lock hand will seal the surrounding space. How can you possibly escape? Mocked Zhao Pan, the gaze that looked towards Zhu Yuan akin to a cat toying with a mouse. Zhu Yuan did not answer. He knew how powerful a divine dwelling expert was, and had no intentions of facing the attack directly. The ancient Saint Rune spun in his eyes, the originally sealed area seemingly becoming much blur. Several weak points appeared. Zhu Yuan used Dragon Step, as he rapidly retreated. He took a dozen steps back at an angle. When the final step fell, the sealed area suddenly vanished, the giant sky-encompassing hand also disappearing. At this moment, Zhao Pan's palm fully landed. The expression on his face immediately turned rigid, as he stared at Zhu Yuan in disbelief. Eh? The other envoys cried out in bewilderment. They clearly knew that no one under the divine dwelling stage could possibly avoid Zhao Pan's palm, and yet it had just been ingeniously evaded by Zhu Yuan. Uproar. The countless geniuses in the area broke into an uproar, shocked gazes looking towards Zhu Yuan. No one had expected him to survive an attack from a divine dwelling stage expert. Mu Wuji's figure flew over in a flash, blocking in front of Zhu Yuan. However, the eyes that looked towards the latter were likewise filled with shock and amazement, evidently unable to understand how he had avoided Zhao Pan's palm. The noises that filled the sky caused Zhao Pan's face to be interlaced by green and white, before ultimately transforming into red rage, killing intent spilling from his eyes. Bastardly thing, you dare to make a fool out of me. I will not forgive you. Howled Zhao Pan, the humiliation he felt turning into extreme rage. It was already shameful for him to attack Zhu Yuan with the power of the divine dwelling stage, while failing to achieve anything with the attack was akin to adding insult to injury. If news of this spread, it would become a black stain on his record that would follow him throughout his rumble. Genesis Chi rose around Mu Wuji, his expression hardening as he gazed upon the now enraged Zhao Pan. It seems that a battle with the latter was unavoidable. Rumble. However, just as Genesis Chi began converging towards the howling Zhao Pan, the world seemed to shake all of a sudden. Countless gazes looked over, only to see a vast torrent of light suddenly sweep out from the still open Saint Remain's domain. It transformed into a giant hand, containing terrifying power as it descended towards Zhao Pan. At the same time, a low voice boomed across the area. When I died back then, I said that the trash of Sacred Palace will not be allowed near here. You little piece of shit, who gave you the balls? The voice dazed the numerous geniuses, while the expressions of Mu Wuji and the other envoys rapidly changed. The still howling Zhao Pan immediately fell silent, confusion flitting across his face for a split second before he suddenly seemed to recall something. His complexion instantly turned deathly pale, as indescribable fear flooded out in his eyes. Patriarch Kang Xian! Zhao Pan involuntarily cried out. In the next instant, he had already turned 180 degrees, desperately running away like a dog that had lost its home. He knew how terrifying an existence he had offended. Even though that person had already died, his lingering will remained in the place he had fallen. Even a mere lingering will was incomparably terrifying to Zhao Pan. Rumble. However, the giant hand in the sky continued to descend, ignoring the laws of space as it appeared behind Zhao Pan. Boom. The sky shook violently. Everyone could only watch as Zhao Pan's figure fell like a cannonball, smashing through mountain after mountain. In the end, Zhao Pan was buried in a giant pile of rubble. Countless geniuses were stupefied. No one had expected the ferocious Zhao Pan from a dozen breaths ago would be thrashed in an instant, no one knowing whether he was dead or alive. The giant hand in the sky gradually dissipated, leaving behind broken mountain after mountain. It looked as if half of the mountain range had been torn apart. Countless people stupidly stared at this scene. Even Zhu Yuan was flabbergasted. He clearly never expected Zhao Pan's actions to incite Patriarch Kang Yuan's remaining power. Patriarch! Mu Wuji blankly stared at this scene, his lips faintly quivering. His face was overwhelmed with emotion, while his eyes were filled with reverence. Zhao Pan is really unlucky. The other four envoys secretly shook their heads. They naturally knew that Patriarch Kang Xian's death had something to do with Sacred Palace. Hence why the Patriarch hated those from Sacred Palace. After Patriarch Kang Xian's death, his body transformed into the numerous saint remains domains littered all over Tsangshuan heaven. If anyone from Sacred Palace got too close, they would incite Patriarch Kang Xian's power, drawing huge trouble to themselves. As such, every member of Sacred Palace did not dare to approach any of these saint remains domains. However, Zhao Pan had not been that close to this saint remains domain, and yet he had somehow still incited Patriarch Kang Xian's power, causing him to suffer bloodily. Bang! Under countless pitying gazes, a pillar of Genesis Chi burst out from the rubble as a figure soared into the sky, his miserable figure hovering in the air. The crowd looked over, only to be shocked. Zhao Pan was drenched in blood, his clothes torn and tattered, while Genesis Chi feebly lingered around him. He had clearly sustained extremely serious injuries. Zhao Pan's entire body trembled uncontrollably, both terrified and angry. How could he ever have imagined that he would incite Patriarch Kang Xian's power? Blasted! I was clearly pretty far away, why did this still happen? Howled Zhao Pan in his heart. How could he not know that the saint remains domains did not welcome those from the Sacred Palace like him? Hence why he had also been maintaining his distance since the beginning, though he somehow still ended incurring the Patriarch's wrath. Mu Wuji let out an icy chuckle as he mocked, "Heh, Zhao Pan, it seems that you're even more loathsome than others, so loathsome that even Patriarch can't stand the sight of you." Zhao Pan's complexion was steely white with anger, but he no longer dared to show any of the bossiness from before. The previous blast of power had terrified him silly, and taking another one would likely kill him on the spot. Moreover, Patriarch Kang Xian's fame and reputation was just too great. Even though he was already dead, the name of the ex-number-1 expert of Tsangshuan heaven still possessed a certain level of intimidation. I'll not forget what happened today. Zhao Pan gnashed his teeth, his venomous gaze looking past Mu Wuji to pause on Zhu Yuan, the killing intent within so thick that it was practically oozing out. Evidently, he was firmly convinced that Zhu Yuan was the main reason for his humiliation today. After leaving these threatening words behind, Zhao Pan no longer had the face to stay even a microsecond longer. With a wave of his sleeve, Genesis Chi swept out, wrapping around Yiming and the rest as the group began flying towards Saint Remain's city. Hence, what was originally supposed to be a fight between divine-dwelling experts ended in a pretty lackluster manner. Countless geniuses sighed in regret before beginning to scatter. Their expressions were somewhat disappointed, because only a tiny fraction had ultimately been chosen by the 6 envoys. An icy look flitted across the depths of Zhu Yuan's eyes as he watched Zhao Pan's leaving figure. Zhao Pan, right. I too will not forget you. There will come a day when I will give you a proper end to today's matter. Zhu Yuan icily said to in his heart. The current him was not Zhao Pan's match, but he was pretty good at holding grudges. If there was a chance in the future, Zhu Yuan would make sure to return everything Zhao Pan had given him today. Mu Wuji turned around, looked towards Zhu Yuan and remarked with a grin, "I did not expect you to be so capable." He was naturally referring to Zhu Yuan's earlier feat of avoiding Zhao Pan's seemingly sure-hit attack. Zhu Yuan smiled. Zhao Pan was a divine dwelling expert whose strength far surpassed his own. If he were to face the attack head-on, he would surely be instantly killed. But if it was just dodging, he would be able to tango for a little while with the power of the Decoder Saint rune. Mu Wuji said, "From now on, the two of you can be said to be the entry-level disciples of the Zhongshuan sect. In a few days, I will bring you two out of the Kangman continent and head to the Zhongshuan sect. We're going there directly." Zhu Yuan was taken aback. "Relax, I will send someone to your empire to inform your parents," said Mu Wuji with a smile. Zhu Yuan hesitated for a moment as he turned his head towards the north, where the Great Zhu Empire was located. "Are you worried about the Great Wu Empire?" asked Mu Wuji when he saw this. He had evidently found out pretty much everything with regards to Zhu Yuan. Zhu Yuan nodded. Although his father had already been freed from the shadow that used to haunt him and was gradually recovering his strength, it was still not enough to put up a fight against King Wu. Moreover, the Great Wu Empire's power far surpassed the Great Zhu Empire. He had defeated Wu Huang and taken back some of the sacred dragon blessing. Once King Wu found out, he would definitely be enraged. Zhu Yuan was afraid that King Wu would turn his fury to the Great Zhu Empire, and the former did not wish to see a broken Great Zhu when he returned. "I wonder how things are progressing with the battle puppet sect ruins. Once we convert every puppet, the Great Zhu Empire's power would surely grow tremendously. When that happens, we may not need to overly fear the Great Wu Empire," thought Zhu Yuan. Mai Wuji took a puff of his pipe and said, "I will send someone to keep an eye on the Great Wu Empire, so you need not worry too much." He then looked at Zhu Yuan. "Besides this, you should also know that King Wu is pretty strong, and has likely reached the divine dwelling stage. Your Great Zhu Empire, on the other hand, doesn't have a single practitioner at this level. A single divine dwelling expert is enough to change everything. If you want your empire to possess the power to contend with the Great Wu Empire, you'll need power that matches the divine dwelling stage. The Zhongshuan sect is one of the strongest sects in Zhongshuan heaven. Only there will you be able to truly spread your wings and grow to become a true powerhouse. That's why you need to grasp this chance." After hearing Mu Wuji's sincere advice, Zhu Yuan gave a slight nod. He naturally understood that only by entering the Zhongshuan sect would he be able to truly bring out his talent. The Kangman continent was just too small for him, and staying here would instead limit his growth. Even the most talented eagle would ultimately descend into mediocrity if trapped in a cage. "I know." Zhu Yuan nodded, his hands slowly clenching as he peered into the distance. "Father, mother, although I can't bear to leave you, as the saying goes, an eagle will one day have to leave its nest. But don't worry, when I return to the Great Zhu Empire, I will personally take back everything our Great Zhu Empire has lost. So, you must wait for my return." Within a study in the Great Zhu Royal Palace, Zhu Qing was seated at his desk with Qin Yu by his side. In front of them stood Wei Kanglan, Wei Qingqing and the Black Venom King with their hands behind their backs. There was a golden slip of paper in Zhu Qing's hand. His expression was somewhat complicated as he touched it and said, "An envoy from the Zhongshuan sect paid us a visit earlier." The words Zhongshuan sect caused the expressions of everyone present to tremble. They clearly understood what these words represented. That one of the overlords of Zhongshuan heaven, an existence that made the Great Zhu Empire look akin to an ant. Alpha Origin practitioners were basically the most elite battle force in the Great Zhu Empire, but when put in the Zhongshuan sect, they would only be ordinary disciples. Wei Kanglan and the rest were nervous. After all, both sides were nowhere near the same level. If the Zhongshuan sect wanted to do anything to the Great Zhu Empire, they would not even have the qualifications to resist. The sight of their expressions made Zhu Qing chuckle for a moment, before he said, "No need to be so nervous. The letter says that Yuana has distinguished himself from the numerous geniuses in the Saint Remains domain, and has been recruited into the Zhongshuan sect. He is now likely already on his way there." These words stunned Wei Kanglan and the Black Venom King. Soon after, they could not help but sigh in amazement. His Highness truly is a genius blessed by the heavens. I can't believe that he has joined the Zhongshuan sect. Wei Kanglan was rather taken aback, his heart filled with admiration. They clearly understood how bright Zhu Yuan's future would be after joining the Zhangshuan sect. By the side, Wei Qingqing's eyes also rippled, a little emotional, as she recalled their first encounter. The first time she had seen Zhu Yuan in Kanglan country, he had still appeared rather immature, though his worth was gradually being revealed. How could she have imagined that the one she had once believed to have cheated his way to first place in the class ranking exam would in a short span of a year reach such giddying heights? Zhu Yuan's name had long since spread across the entire Kangman continent. Everyone knew the epic of how the Prince of Great Zhu had, with his Heaven Gate stage strength, defeated the Alpha Origin Prince of Great Wu Huang, in the Saint Remains domain, becoming the #1 individual amongst the Kangman continent's younger generation. And now, Zhu Yuan had stepped through the doors of the Zhangshuan sect like a carp jumping through the Dragon's Gate. It was becoming more and more difficult to imagine how dazzling the young man would be when they met again. His Highness truly is a sacred dragon, sighed the Black Venom King. He had no choice but to acknowledge Zhu Yuan's battle accomplishments. From what he could see, even he may not be able to achieve victory against Zhu Yuan now. The immature young man he had encountered in Blackwater had already begun to surpass him. Their words made Zhu Qing grin widely, a smile filled with pride. Zhu Qing said, "On the letter, Yuan told us to be a little more careful of the Great Wu Empire, especially the now angered King Wu." Wei Zhanlang cupped his fists together and said, "Don't worry, Your Majesty. I have already sent the majority of our forces to the border to keep a tight eye on any activity from the Great Wu Empire." Zhu Qing nodded. He then looked towards the Black Venom King and inquired, "How is the progress at the Battle Puppet Sect ruins? We've already discovered 5 Alpha Origin battle puppets, and the number of Heaven Gate puppets has reached the hundreds, and we foresee even more in the future." Zhu Qing nodded his head in satisfaction. 5 Alpha Origin battle puppets, and several hundred Heaven Gate battle puppets was a powerful force. Such a force would undoubtedly greatly boost the Great Zhu Empire's might, making it such that the Great Wu Empire would not be able to achieve anything significant unless they used all of their forces to attack. The Great Wu Empire's forces were currently tied up, making them unable to do so. Great. It's been hard-won, everyone. The Great Zhu Empire needs to conceal our strength and bide for time as we accumulate power. I believe that the day will eventually come when the Great Zhu Empire will regain our former glory," said Zhu Qing with a faint smile. From Zhu Qing's expression, Wei Kanglan and the Black Venom King could sense the former's growing kingly dignity. A change that could be attributed to removing the shadow in his heart and the gradual recovery of his strength. A complicated expression rose on Wei Kanglan's face. The Great Zhu Empire was no longer depressing and waning like before, but instead filled with a certain drive as it steadily grew. It seemed as if everything had begun to change when their prince found his 8 meridian channels and began to cultivate. The face of a gentle and calm youth surfaced in Wei Kanglan's mind as he sighed in his heart. The Zhu clan does indeed have a sacred dragon. After a brief discussion, Wei Kanglan and the rest withdrew, leaving Zhu Qing and Qin Yu behind. The smile on Zhu Qing's face faded, his fingers feeling the golden paper in his hand as he softly sighed. "I wonder when Yuana will return." Qin Yu's eyes were slightly red. She was the most pained and unwilling to see her son go so far away. "But don't worry, Yuana. Father may not be as capable as you, but I will do all I can to protect the Great Zhu Empire and ease your worries. You only need to concentrate on your cultivation in the Zhangshuan sect." Zhu Qing raised his head, his expression turning a little grim as his gaze penetrated the window and looked towards the direction of the Great Wu Empire. King Wu was a giant mountain that loomed over the entire Great Zhu Empire. Zhu Qing knew that the former had already stepped into the divine dwelling stage, wielding power that far surpassed his own. "King Wu, you are indeed an outstanding individual. On this point, I admit that I am inferior to you. However, you've made one fatal mistake. That is, you've overly underestimated the sacred dragon of my Zhu clan. So what if you've reached the divine dwelling stage? When the sacred dragon of my Zhu clan returns, it will be time for your Wu clan to pay its debts." High up in the sky, the clouds were suddenly torn open as a giant shadow zoomed past. The shadow cleanly cut layer after layer of cloud into two, its speed as fast as a shooting star. At closer inspection, one would discover that it was a giant boat. Countless ancient patterns had been carved into the boat's body, giving off magnificent Genesis chi undulations. The boat was known as a Sky Breaker shuttle. It was a Genesis treasure used for rapid long-distance traveling, and boasted extremely high speeds. In addition, it could withstand numerous natural elements, allowing it to travel freely. On the giant boat was a beautiful 100 flowers pattern, indicating that it belonged to the 100 Flowers Fairy Palace. The passengers on board were the 6 envoys and the chosen geniuses from the Kangman continent. The Kangman continent was extremely far from the continent where the 6 sacred sects were situated, and not all the continents along the way were equipped with teleportation arrays. Therefore, the only option was to travel through these continents. However, there were strong astral winds between the continents, which could only be crossed by a vessel such as the Skybreaker shuttle. Trying to cross without one was extremely exhausting, and not a feat that ordinary people would be capable of. Given the cultivation of Zhu Yuan and the rest, they clearly did not possess the qualifications to cross between continents. On a certain level on the giant boat, Mu Wuji was seated cross-legged as he puffed his pipe. Before him were Zhu Yuan, Yao Yao, and the other dozen or so geniuses that had been chosen to enter the Zhangshuan sect. Zhu Yuan and Yao Yao were seated at the front, clearly the leaders of the group. In the small group behind them was a familiar figure. It was the junior city lord of Saint Romain's city, Xiao Tianxian. At the very beginning, Zhu Yuan had been rather astonished that Xiao Tianxian had managed to enter the Zhangshuan sect. Later on, Mu Wuji explained that he had given his permission because the city lord had personally pleaded. Although Zhu Yuan was not really fond of the guy who had given him quite a bit of trouble in the Saint Romain's domain, he did not make things difficult. After all, following Zhu Yuan's rise in strength, Xiao Tianxian was no longer a threat. Xiao Tianxian was a smart individual, and knew that his status as junior city lord was useless here. Hence, he was much more well-behaved on their journey, as if afraid that Zhu Yuan would target him. At our current speed, we should reach the Xingju continent in a month. Do all of you know of the Xingju continent? Mu Wuji felt that it was a good time to teach these little ones some common knowledge. Everyone shook their heads. Mu Wuji sighed and began to explain, the Xingju continent is the #1 continent in Zhangshuan heaven. Legend says all of the other continents in Zhangshuan heaven were split off from Xingju continent. Hence, if one were to say that the total blessings of Zhangshuan heaven was 10, the Xingju continent would be blessed with 60%. That's why it has been called the gathering place of Genesis Qi. The Xingju continent's vastness is far beyond your imagination, and every one of the 6 sacred sects have been established there. Although we 6 sacred sects are the strongest factions in Xingju continent, there exist several sects with ancient roots and strong foundations that are not to be underestimated. After spending a good part of the day talking, Mu Wuji took one final puff of smoke, before he glanced at the group and slowly said, besides all this, there is something I should tell all of you. Although you guys were selected by me, it does not mean that you will be able to truly become disciples of the Zhangshuan sect. These words caused everyone's expression to freeze for a moment. There are millions of continents in Zhangshuan heaven, and the geniuses of these continents will also be selected by the Zhangshuan sect. At the end of the day, the number of new disciples will likely be over 10,000. These individuals are the same as yourselves, each one an outstanding elite in their respective continents. After you guys arrive at the Zhangshuan sect, all of the new disciples will have 3 months to acclimatize and train. After which will be the peak selection ceremony. And only by passing the peak selection ceremony would you be allowed to enter one of the 7 peaks, and formally become disciples of the Zhangshuan sect. About half of the participants will be eliminated during the peak selection ceremony. In other words, likely half, or even more of you guys will be eliminated. These individuals can only become recorded disciples, which may only train outside the peaks. Only after making sufficient contributions will they be permitted to join the 7 peaks. Upon hearing these words, even Zhu Yuan's eyes widened slightly. To think that half would be eliminated, looks like it wasn't so easy to enter the Zhangshuan sect. This video will end here.